This is an example of now sustaining and maintaining a hydrogen gas flame from ordinary natural water. The flame is burning around 47 centimeters a second. In the prior state of the art, that was totally, absolutely impossible. Normally, when you burn hydrogen and oxygen, you cannot see it, nor smell it, nor taste it, because it's a very clean burning fuel. You'll see a small portion of the flame that's actually being projected around 9 inches in height. The flame temperatures we have achieved from 5,000 up to over 20,000 degrees temperature. The question now being asked that we can sustain high temperatures to melt steel, but yet why does it not spark back into the generator? In all probability, if NASA had had this technology, our astronauts would have not died in vain. But I was developing the technology when the accident actually had occurred. And of course, I could tell you some very interesting happenings of events like blowing a hole in the living room floor. And I always believe in a moment of adversity there's something to learn. And so I knew I had to come up with a fail-safe fuel cell if it was going to be a viable energy system to put into the economy. So the quenching circuit technology was developed. And what we had found out is that as you put the fuel gases through a small little tubular passageway, somewhere along the line, the non-combustible gases that do not support the burning process acts as a blockage to prevent the hydrogen and oxygen atoms to come together to cause gas ignition. And therefore, we had come up with a very simple way of an anti-spark-back device that was not dependent either on gas pressure or gas volume. In other words, anti-spark-back, or to prevent a spark-back into the fuel cell, now was 100%. As you see the small little holes in the center of the disc, they form the quenching circuit. The disc itself is made out of aluminum material. The reason why we used it is because we do not want the hole size to be elongated, and ceramic materials were extremely ideal to prevent oxidation from occurring when the liberated hydrogen atoms would go through other materials such as brass or steel. We took that technology and extended it to form a quenching tube by which we now can transport the hydrogen and oxygen gas. We can literally burn it, send a tracer bullet through it, and you will not ignite the gases going back into the fuel cell. This solved the next major requirement of NASA, being able to transport the hydrogen gas without spark ignition. Now, this is an example of adjusting the burn rate of hydrogen gas. Irregardless of whoever comes up with a hydrogen generator, they're going to have to go through our patents. To give you a classical example of this, in a tube, if I would put hydrogen and ambient air in it and ignite it at one end, it would travel 325 centimeters a second. Now, everybody knows about stoichiometrics configuration. When I filed the patents in the United States Patent Office, they came back and said, "Stan, we don't know what you're talking about, the adjustment of the burn rate of hydrogen gas. We understand stoichiometrics." I said, "Well, if I illustrate it to you, will you allow the patent?" He said, "Absolutely." So we found out that hydrogen with ambient air will burn at 325 centimeters per second. We took natural gas as an example and put it in the same condition and sparked it, and we found out that it would burn around 42 centimeters a second. So it became very obvious that if I would mix non-combustible gases with the hydrogen and oxygen gases coming out of the fuel cell, I would use the non-combustible gas as a modulator to regulate the speed by which the oxygen atom would unite to the hydrogen atom, and as a result now have the ability to adjust the hydrogen burn rate to co-equal that of all of the fossil fuels, and I can adjust the hydrogen burn rate down to that of burning leaves or papers. That gave me now the economics of being able to retrofit the fuel cell to any existing energy-consuming device in the economy. As a businessman, I am also a research development engineer. You will see a videotape showing us seeing a dune buggy running on water. I knew that I had to comply with the law of economics, and the law of economics strictly means that the guy who comes up with the most economical way is going to win out. There are a lot of Cadillac ideas that come into existence, but they do not get out in the marketplace basically because they violate the law of economics. So the development of the technology was being developed under the premise, keep it simple. Use the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. Anyone ever heard of that? If you keep it simple, you can get the economics down. Now we found out that as we were processing the gas, we were producing tremendous high temperature flames. But yet I was confronted with that if I would put the fuel cell and hook it up to a stove, the wives would get really kind of irritated and mad at us that when they come back and said, look, you burn holes in our pots and pans. So the next step was, how can you adjust the burn rate to go from 5,000 degrees temperatures down to 200 or 300 degrees and do it under the law of economics. And so it was very obvious that the gases coming out of the fuel cell, that we could recapture those gases going through the flame, recycling back into the flame or back into the generator. And as a result of this, by regulating its flow rate, we now can adjust the burn rate of hydrogen and gas to any temperature levels we so desire. Now, since I'm using the gases coming off the flame, does it cost them anything? No, Zippo, other than the apparatus itself. Now we were confronting that in the prior technology that they were changing the design of the engine and the compression strokes and trying to use very exotic materials. The key was that we need the cars to run and the trucks. So how do we run an internal combustion engine? As an engineer, you will look at this in three ways. Number one, the engine is a mechanical drive device. Secondly, it's an air pump. It will pump air through the carburetor and send it out the exhaust. Thirdly, you look at an internal combustion engine that it is a manufacturer of non-combustible gases. So we now simply take the gases that's gone through the burning processes that has eliminated the burning product in the fuel and also eliminated the oxygen atom, and as a result now metered mix back into the fuel cell, and we now automatically adjusting the burn rate of that hydrogen gas to co-equal that of gasoline or diesel fuel, and as a result you do not have to change any of the design characteristics on an existing engine. You will see on the videotape very shortly this dune buggy actually running off water. It was syndicated 3 years ago on ABC's news. They came down and literally videotaped it for 3 hours to know that it was running on water, and it had gone all over the world. This is what I call the boilerplate configuration, which was used to obtain all of our patents nationally and internationally. We've now taken the technology to the point of being able to transport the hydrogen gas through conventional gas grid system. Prior art dictated that you would cool the hydrogen down to around 400 and some degrees and put it under pressure and transport it down the road by trucks. This type of technology now gives us the ability that we could transport the hydrogen gas through existing gas grid systems without even changing one piece of hardware. We simply now taking the ambient air, which is one of the cheapest commodities on earth, exposing it to a flame to produce the non-combustible gases that are now mixing with the hydrogen gas, and as a result, we can adjust the hydrogen burn rate to that of natural gas or even adjust it lower, and therefore we now have a very safe way of transporting the hydrogen gas that over exceeds the prior art of the technology. Now we come to the point that, as we know, you burn hydrogen and oxygen, the byproduct is water, and so therefore we want to use and recapture the water and recycle it back into the generator. So inherently the fuel cell is a fantastic water purification device. To accomplish this, we now use the old method of the gas-fired refrigerators, as you probably have known when you were young, where you take a flame and heat a gas, and as you circulate the heated gas to go through a gas expansion chamber, then as the gases will expand, you'll have a cooling effect. So the heated gas, the superheated gases coming off the hydrogen flame now is condensed down and cooled back into water vapor. And since the electrical polarization pulls apart the water molecule by a physical force, any contaminants in water remains in the fuel cell. And as a result, if there is any bacteria that leaves the water and attaches itself to the liberated gases, cannot and does not live through an exposure of a 5,000 degree flame. So inherently, the characteristic of the fuel cell now gives us the ability to purify water and even go into desalination of salt water and do it in a way that we do not use any chemicals or filtration of any sort. In order to comply and ensure that we have a system that does not produce nitrous oxide, which would be minuscule in application, we now expose it to a catalytic block, allowing the design of the hemisphere itself to redirect any gases back into the flame that may escape the combustion process, and as a result, we have a way of converting 100% of the gases coming out of the fuel cell. This is an example that we've designed it also to comply with Murphy's Law. Any of you have done any development, you know Murphy gets in the way. So in order to prevent leakage of hydrogen gas, we now are adjusting the quenching circuit in a way that if you have a blowout, then the adjoining flame will reignite the gases coming out of the fuel cell. Now, as we know that as you burn hydrogen and oxygen gases from water and you will burn it, we know that in the gas combustion process you will release energy, thermal explosive energy, up to 2.5 times that of gasoline. But there is a phenomenal amount of energy in water if you can be able to tap into it. Einstein suggested that there was enough energy in water that you could literally take a train of a 1,000-car train around the earth many, many, many times if you can tap into the process. Now, we all know what happened to the nuclear industry. I was in Washington, D.C. in 1965 when they were trying to come up with a fail-safe nuclear power system. 3 days in the meeting, I got up and said, gentlemen, everything you have said in this meeting is a bunch of malarkey, because as you subject the radiation to our materials, you will have the hourglass effect. And unfortunately, 3 Mile Island occurred within that time that I had prophesied back in 1965. But can we now be able to tap into an even greater source of energy? You know, when the Arabs threw the embargo on the United States, it alarmed me that, in fact, that if we would not get our cars and trucks on the roads again and start moving very quickly, the food supply chain in the United States was 27 days. When I made technical presentation to General Bouchard at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and General Abramson in the Pentagon, I said, gentlemen, I want to remind you that, in fact, that during the Arab embargo, you only had 2.5 days of aviation fuel to fight a war. And I don't care how sophisticated aircraft you have on the runway, if you have no way of powering that jet, it's a piece of junk. Now, you know and I know the generals don't like to have their equipment be called a piece of junk. So it's very important that we bring a new technology into the economies of the world. We also have to be able to protect the military base of the United States. So as we liberated the gases from water, we are now resubjecting those liberated gases to even a higher pulse voltage frequency. We are restricting the amps and allow voltage to take over to perform its work. We are now injecting laser energy into the process to aid the ejection of the electrons.
When do we have to leave for airport? What time?
3:30.
It's 3:30 now.
Well, we'll go on.
When?
Yeah, we'll go on.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically what I'm doing now is that I am now taking the combustible gas ions and I'm now bringing it into subcritical state. I've pulled off the electrons. I have now subjected to photon energy, and what I'm now doing is taking combustible gas atoms and put them in the subcritical state. In order to do this, I had to invent now the electron extraction circuit. When I developed the electron extraction circuit, which I shut off the flow of amps and all voltage to take over to eject the electrons, I now come up with an alternate way of redirecting those liberated negative electrons. And as a result, if you would apply the B plus across a filament of a light bulb, then those negative charge electrons will go into the filament, interact to produce heat in the form of light energy. But what I'm now illustrating to you, that not only are we setting up the condition to bring about the hydrogen fracturing process, we are now producing electrical energy simultaneously, which that electrical energy now can be recycled back in electronic circuits to aid the voltage intensifier circuit to perform the electrical polarization process. This is an example now that when you inject the combustible gas atoms to laser energy, it causes the electrons to go to a higher energy state, which now allows electrons to be ejected from the oxygen atom as an example. And by subjecting it to the pulse voltage frequency, we pull away the electrons and then we consume the electrons and not allow the electrons to go back into the process. So we are now keeping the combustible gas atoms into a very critical state. To do this, we now developed what is called the hydrogen gas gun technology. Now, basically what we are doing is we know that, in fact, that when you ignite hydrogen and oxygen gases, it will release the thermal explosive energy up to 2.5 times that of gasoline. The scientific question that was to be asked at this particular point is that what happens during thermal gas ignition of hydrogen if you could prevent the formation of the water molecule from occurring. In other words, if you could prevent the formation of the water molecule from occurring and could not reach stable state, then in fact that explosive energy would keep continuing to be released from the process until such time either a new atom structure is formed or that an implosion effect and release pure energy. Now, since the energy problem has been occurring in the scientific world, Livermore Laboratories has been trying to use hydrogen fusion, as you know, by taking hydrogen and subjecting it to high temperatures and high pressures around 10 million degrees and put it in an electromagnetic bottle and trying to release its energy. Another process, which was very successfully demonstrated in the university environment, was called the muon process. Now, we know that if you will decrease the mass of an atom, it must release its energy. And under the muon process, they took a muon, which is twice the size of an electron, and caused the hydrogen atom to accept the muon and reject its natural electron. Now, once that has occurred, then decay comes about on the muon, and once the muon decays, then the hydrogen atom no longer stays in existence, and the energy that's there to hold the electron in its outer orbit is no longer there, and therefore under the law of physics, everything must be stabilized and therefore releases tremendous amounts of energy. What we're now doing is setting a subcritical mass of combustible gas atoms, decreasing its mass size and allowing and preventing the formation of the water molecule from occurring to release phenomenal amount of energy. Now, this is an example of taking a hydrogen gas gun and putting it on top of the resonant cavity. Matter of fact, the hydrogen gas gun can be reduced down to the size of a spark plug or the gas injector system of an F-15 or an F-18 and literally fly an F-18 or a 15 on the atomic power of water. This is some of the electronic circuit interfacing that gave us the patents worldwide on this technology. Now, to give you an example of the hydrogen fracturing process to prevent the formation of the water molecule is that Ike and I are on a basketball court, and he's the hydrogen atom and I'm the big oxygen atom. Now, I'm 8 times bigger than he is, right? Now, what I've done is I've zapped Ike with laser energy. And because I had hit him with laser energy, his electron migrates farther away from the nucleus, and as a result of that, the electrical attraction force between that electron and nucleus becomes weakened. So he is now in a weakened state. But I am the big oxygen atom, and I got 4 missing electrons, and under the law of physics says I want to stabilize, and I need some electrons. But I'm also injected with laser energy, and I'm in a highly energized state, and that absorbed laser energy in the nucleus is preventing me from allowing me to go back to stable state. So I have an abnormal state, I'm in a subcritical state, and then I am then subjected to thermal ignition. And so as a result, the hydrogen oxide atom seeks to come together to form the water molecule, but it is not in stable state. And as a result of that, an avalanche effect occurs, and once that takes place and stabilization cannot occur, you start to release thermal explosive energy of a fantastic magnitude. This process in the hydrogen fracturing process, the potential yield is 2.5 million barrels of oil per gallon of water. And since there is no neutron interreaction in the process, it is a very clean process. So we now have the abilities to retrofit the technology to any form of aircraft you so desire, even rocket engines. We can take even the liquid hydrogen and the liquid oxygen subjected to the hydrogen fracturing process and obtain tremendous Mach yields, where the United States was originally developing a hydrogen-powered aircraft to go Mach 25. It is now slated to go Mach 150 in outer space with this type of technology. We now found, since voltage stimulates the process, We could not rely on prior generators to give us the economics of reliability to operate both under the seas as well as in space. So all of these electrical generators and the type of technology had to be developed to give us the form of economics. I would tell many people in our presentation that the Lord had given me a phenomenal electrical generator. Here are the following characteristics. It has only one moving part that never wears out. It has no bearings. It has no contact brushes. I can give you single or three-phase or multi-phase power output, and if that don't bother you, I can drop it in a bucket of water and it will never short out. Now, they would start to laugh at me, but once I start showing the technology, they stop laughing. Now, anytime you can get three-star generals out of their chairs in 10 minutes in the Pentagon, you're doing something, right? So in order to overcome the opposing magnetic fields are associated with rotary electrical generators, the EPG system technology was developed. Basically, the technology centered around...
7 minutes past.
Huh?
It's already 7 minutes past.
Okay, how far you want me to go? Hurry up.
Yeah.
Okay.
You said at 3:30 you have to leave, no?
Yeah, all right.
It's 3:37.
Okay, I think we're going to miss it.
Okay.
What we're doing now is taking a non-magnetic closed-loop tube, filling it with a permanently magnetized gas, and now accelerating the magnetized gas in such a way as its magnetic field will transverse the pickup coils, satisfying Maxwell and Faraday's law of electrical generation of allowing the magnetic field to perform the work as it passes through the pickup coil. The energy input into the system is not to form the magnetic field. The only energy going into the system is to move the magnetic field, which you are not breaking. In order to accomplish the task, there was no form of generator possible to this date because there was no such thing as a magnetized gas that existed at room temperature. So we took the technology that we developed on the hydrogen gas gun to set up an environment by which we now ionize the gas ions, and we have now taken atoms that normally do not link together, eject their electrons, and as a result force them to come